education and product enthusiast with experience with working from various startups. He has worked in data analytics and operational roles for various consumer-based startups and is presently leveraging its structured decision-making in classrooms. He has worked with various products with a lens on problem identification and human solutions and is currently focused on bringing a culture of data analytics into the schools and classrooms. Sir has also worked at Teach for India and is currently working at Augmented Understanding. Sirs, I'm honored to call you upon to conduct this session. Thank you so much.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much, Arundhati, for that very kind introduction. It's a sincere privilege. It's a sincere honor to be in this group of folks talking about our experience of working with data and education. And I hope that we're going to be taking the next 15 minutes in a conversational way that we're going to be showing you a range of things that we do. But that besides, I'm going to be using a lot of our interactions over Zoom chats. So I'm going to be throwing a few questions. Would love to have a few thoughts from this room. Please make sure to actively participate, right? And that's the spirit with which we're going to start. Let me quickly jump into starting something because we have quite a few things to share with you guys and excited to do it. Just before I start, if I can get a quick confirmation if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Super. So once again, welcome to a quick seminar on data and education. Ideally, it's going to be a session that's going to talk about data and education, though we want to talk about big data. We were actually rather looking at this lens of saying that how do we start talking about data and education in general, and then start getting into the pieces of what are some big and smalls out of it. Also, alongside, we're going to be talking about a range of things that we have done on the ground, just so that you're able to pick up some interest in what happens, especially in the education sector as such, right? Again, I think it's very well known who the audience is. I think it's wonderful to have each of you with us. Our agenda is going to be simple. We're going to be looking at, say, 3 different things here. We're going to first deconstruct the idea of data first. Then I'm going to deconstruct the idea of what the education sector looks like. And then let's start talking about what are the samples of areas where the two of them meet, right? I would like to keep this in a very normal, everyday language of conversation going back and forth. So just keep it conversational, use the Zoom chats, give your emojis and contacts in terms of responding back to me. Who we are, what we've done, I think we've already gotten a beautiful introduction from our speaker this morning, this evening. But just to give you a quick heads up, I'm Prasanna Sundaram, Charan Murthy. Both of us together have roughly about a good 25-30 years of experience of working with data in different avenues. Both of us worked in the corporate for a good about almost like 5 to 6 years to 10 years. I mean, I spent 10 years, Charan spent about 6 years. And we've seen how data allows us to make a lot of difference in understanding our customers and reaching out to them. Eventually, we joined the Teach for India fellowships. We basically worked in schools. We've been working, I mean, Charan continues to work as a teacher right now. And that's where our lens of understanding how data works in the overall sector started. And we're going to be sharing a lot of inputs of what we've seen over there. But just before I begin, can I just ask a quick question from this room? What are the first things that come into your mind when someone says the word data? What are the first things that comes into your mind when someone says the word data-driven decision making? And if I can just get a few thoughts on the chat box really quick, please. There's someone who says insights. Thank you. Information. Okay. Analysis. Okay. Great. Any more? There are 100 of us. I'm going to expect at least 10% of the responses from there. What are the first few things that comes into your mind when someone says the word data? Rows and columns filled with digits. Super interesting. Can I get some more? CIA triad. Okay. Numbers. Okay. Great. And how does it feel? How does the first feeling that you get when someone says the word data? Do you feel fatigued? Do you feel excited? Do you feel enthusiastic? What are the first few things that comes into your mind? Don't worry about keeping this, absolutely correct about something. That's the last thing that you're worried about. Fatigue. Okay. Thank you so much, Sonakshi. Why fatigue? Sonakshi, can you just give me a little one line on why do you imagine fatigue when someone says the word data? Anyone else also in the meantime? What are the thoughts? Do you get some images in your head? Are you able to figure out something that comes into your mind? Also the same question. Okay, Arundhati says graphs, interesting. How often do you make data-driven decisions? If I can put this question now. Servers, thank you, Smith. Facts, excellent, thank you. Collection, great. Now we're getting some responses. All right, so how often do you make data-driven decisions? Each of you. Do you guys ever make data-driven decisions? Every day. Super. Anyone else? People say any example as such, any example that you can talk to me about? Weather forecast, almost everything. Super. This room is quite quick out there. I'm glad. And with that, I think knowing that where we are trying to go with this, I'm going to start opening my first question here. Rather, I'm going to open up a first example. How many of you like a cup of tea? Fatigue, because you have to make sense of literature with quantitative data to make sense out of it. So Nakshi, okay. How many of you enjoy a cup of tea here? Quick thumbs ups, thumbs downs. Just show me a hands up wherever it goes. Okay. Oh, I see 3, 4, 5, 6. Superb, superb, superb. How many of you make a cup of tea? I see a lot of thumbs ups. Excellent. And with so many of you, just about 8, and the rest of you don't have a cup of tea, don't prefer to have a cup of tea, don't like tea. Anyways, so when you make a cup of tea, the first question that I ask for this room is, do you make a cup of tea with the can someone just walk me through what you put in a cup of tea? You probably put some tea leaves, you put some sugar, you put some water. Water, yeah, you have a excellent. Milk. So we have milk. So we have milk, we have tea leaves, we have sugar, we have a range of things that we put in. My question to this group now is that do we put the exact same ingredient each time? Yes. No, right? Not really. I mean, do we put the exact same quantity? No, do we use the exact same measurements of milk and water and whatnot? So technically, as people, even when we make a cup of tea, in our heads, we are already working with measurements. We always go with different measurements, making these decisions, saying that, oh, probably I'm going to make tea for one person. So it's going to be 1 spoon of, tea leaves, 1 spoon of sugar and whatnot. And on that basis, we make these decisions constantly. And that's where we start imagining that if the situation changes where there is more than one person, maybe the quantities will move back and forth. Maybe if the outcome that we're going for, wherein somebody wants a sugarless tea, somebody has a diabetes, then we change the ingredients back and forth. In our heads, technically, all of us make data-driven decisions on a daily basis. Somehow, when we think of it in a very professional sense, we get into this span of saying, oh, this is difficult, or this is something that we do in the job. Not really. We work with data almost on a daily basis. The challenge, not the challenge, when this data starts going up, when you start imagining this set of data for thousands of cups of tea that you have to make every day, probably 3 times a day. Maybe for each time that somebody's having a tea, you have a different preference of what you're going to have in the evening versus morning. If somebody's had a medical record that goes over a period of time where you see that they moved away from, say, sugar tea to sugarless tea, these are the kind of decisions that a corporate like, say, Chayos or somebody makes. And when you get into this decision, again, it's coming from the foundation of you making a cup of tea, those 4 or 5 ingredients. But when you start thinking of this at a wide scale, that's exactly where you start needing those bigger tools. That's to start doing these things for you. Technically, at the gist of it, at the basic of it, you're still making the same decision, 1 cup of tea to be made. But when you have to make this at that scale, that in probably December, May, Bombay, May, how do you make a cup of tea for this person who has a medical history in the last 6 months? That's exactly where your big data tools like Hadoop and these things actually start coming in place. At the core of it, you're still making the same kind of decisions. So technically, data-driven decisions are something that you make on a daily basis. Your big data starts playing the role as you start looking at a lot more variables to get to the same result, right? That's your introduction to just data and big data. Any thoughts before I move forward? So while we are doing this, like I said, I think as you make a cup of tea, your tea is always not just defined by one person's tea that you're making, but you may end up making multiple ways of making tea, multiple kind of people. And that's exactly where, when you have to make these decisions on a constant basis, you're using these tools like Hadoop and SQL and R and whatnot to make these decisions happen, right? But at the core of it, if you're going back, there are 4 broad steps to making any data-driven decisions. Any problem that you're analyzing, irrespective of which sector you go into, you will probably have a big chunk of information in front of you. The basic 4 steps that if you're able to follow, you get into breaking down the problem statement is going to be first understanding what makes your data up. Just saying that if you're looking at a particular number, if you're looking at a particular subject, can you break it down into different compositions to say maybe this data is made up of, say, this city versus another city, and are they probably fair to compare? Can we look at this data to say who's my audience? Do we have males versus females? Understand if they are fair to compare. If you're looking at, say, in our example, government schools versus private schools, are they fair to compare? Are we looking at the kind of people paying the fees, the economic structure, going to this school versus another school? Are they fair to compare? So you first understand what makes your data up. Once you're done, then you get into the span of saying, understanding how do you make comparisons? What is it that it takes to compare 2 things? As people, the first thing that we do is comparisons. Once again, taking it back to the subject of this evening, we're talking about education. A lot of times we make these comparisons saying that, oh, government schools are not really up to the mark, up to, say, a private school. But are we even making that right kind of comparison? Do we know who are the kind of students who go into a government school versus who are the kind of students who go into a private school? What kind of private school are we talking about? How many different kinds of private schools that are there? So imagining these scenarios will automatically start giving us some kind of a hint saying that, Acha, I'm able to imagine a person going into the school. What kind of audience is going into the school? How do I understand them better and give a fair comparison to it? Once you're able to break it down, then you are able to start looking at trends and patterns over a period of time. Even if it's just patterns between comparing two different elements or looking at these two elements over a period of time to say that maybe the number of girls coming to school in July goes down potentially in a particular place. And these are kind of events that show up. And finally, relationships that tell you that what might be causing these trends and patterns to happen. Say, for an example, the example that I just used, the chances of girls coming to school in the month of July goes down, especially in areas where it's very heavy monsoons. Right? But the idea of working with data has to be this curiosity towards understanding what a problem statement is, what makes my problem up, what am I able to compare, and how do I go down understanding what makes that particular thing happen. That's your first introduction to just understanding data and basic data driven decision making. What does big data do in this entire space as such? I'm sure you've heard this from other folks as well, but I always like to just start over there. Once that we have this idea of what's data doing for us, our next thing that we can look at is what defines our education sector. Because when we say data in education, education generally sounds like one sector, but technically, if you're looking at education as a sector is almost a parallel to the universe that we live in. It's a societal entire thing. So while someone says, data in retail, you can still understand because retail has a set of practices. When someone says data in banking and finance sector, you can understand because there is a set of, activities that happen over there. Education as a sector is it's a very, vast sector as such. The number of variables, the number of elements that we work with is very different. Just if you look at education itself probably falls into two broad, elements of saying, just breaking it down into two compositions. There's something on the for-profit side, and there's something on the not-for-profit side. And you'll have the same alternatives on both sides. You will have schools on the for-profit, which can be private schools, your international schools, your unaided schools. While on the not-for-profit side, you're looking at it, you'll probably find government schools, low-income private schools, and whatnot. Similarly, if you go down that path, again, education can be broken down into so many different ways. There are so many different spots for us to identify and work with. There's something on the Montessori side. If you're looking at, say, the private side, Montessori has, organizations like Clay Schools, Little Millennium, Little Gym, each of them targeted towards a set of audiences who can pay for it. And then at the not-for-profit side, you'll always find something called the Anganwadis. These Anganwadis are basically teachers who are working with the last and lowest end of the society, trying to work with the students over there. Same thing goes across the board. Universities and colleges, you'll have state colleges, deemed colleges, universities and colleges, you have aided and minority. You have coaching institutes like Princeton, GMAT, Akash, and Kota, while at the not-for-profit, basically the social development side, there are tons of coaching institutes. Every street has a coaching institute available for students to go to. You have co-curricular engagements, you have training institutes, and then we have the edtech companies that have come into it, right? Education itself can be seen in so many different lenses, depending on your area of interest and depending on where you want like to understand. But knowing that so many exist, each of them generate a lot of data. Each of them have their own set of students. Each of them try to pick up their own set of information. Each of them would like to process understanding that who my particular student is and how best can we cater to them. Newly in the last few years, things that have started happening is then we've suddenly had this. I think in the last 2 years, there's been a spread of this whole edtech companies, right? So we have Byju's, and then we have Vedantu, we have Upgrad, we have Great Learning. Name it. Tomorrow you open a paper, you'll find a new edtech organization. And I'm pretty sure that as you guys are graduating from your college, or even if you're a young worker right now, edtech companies are going to be available to you for a job almost quite immediately in the next, say, if not happening today, then tomorrow, because that's where a lot of companies are happening. And simultaneously, there is also a lot of spread of the NGOs, which is looking like, say, your Teach for India, your Simple Education Foundation, your iTeach. So there's been a organic growth on both sides. Suddenly, edtechs have opened up. There are a lot more companies that have opened up over there. And then we have NGOs, which have also started happening a lot more because of the whole CSR budgets and whatnot. So technically, as you're looking at data, all of them are collecting data. All of them are having information. All of them are working with students. The lens with which each of them have to be identified is a little different, right? And with that, let me just quickly open up saying that if we have so many education institutes, then the data points that we collect has also started going up. If you're looking at, say, the left side, we have something called the NAS, which is nothing but the National Achievement Survey, which is a Government of India body which collects a lot of data, does a lot of assessments. Then we have something called the ASER, again, pan-India assessments, so many students being assessed. At this other end of saying, bringing up the edtech and whatnot, now we have Flip Class, which says it uses big data to improve learning outcomes. Then there are some other organizations that give you AI-powered assessments, evaluation, practice. All of them are generating data. That the CBSE has just come up with a whole advanced analytics to understand how to prevent cheating and exam irregularities. But as we speak about all of this, this is where I'm going to pivot this session into something totally different. That if we start talking about in these languages, and I'm sure that as your campuses open up and you talk to a lot of edtech companies, they will start speaking about a lot of these activities. But can I just bring our question down to something simple, saying that if we are collecting so much of data, I'm going to put this question to this group right now. If I just ask this question that says girls in the age group of 14 to 18 score better than boys in academics. 14 to 18-year-old girls score better than boys in academics when compared to boys the same age. What are your views in this room? What do you think happens here? Do you think girls in the age group of 14 to 18 score better than boys? So that's about 10th standard. I mean, so we're talking about that kind of age. So Paris says yes. Can I get some more responses in the chat box, please? Havish says yes. Okay. Can I get some more responses? Have you ever come across this kind of a statement? Ever read it somewhere? Where have you read this? I mean, have you read this somewhere? Have you thought of it somewhere? Smith says equal. Okay. Anaga says yes. Melena says yes. Very nice. Yashwan, thank you so much. And anywhere that you've read this, have you ever heard statements like this before? Where have you seen this? Where are you coming from? Can anybody quote me a source? Do you ever see this annually in the end of? Thank you so much, Sonakshi. Sonakshi says 10th and 12th boards. Year after year, Times of India publishes saying that the girls in this particular city has probably outpaced boys. Boys have probably come together to the girls, and these kind of messages keep coming across back and forth. And frankly, a lot of such decisions around education is made with these kind of statements. A lot of money that goes into say policy making, a lot of money that goes into NGOs, edtechs believe in these kind of statements. But the fact is, when you start going to the ground and you start understanding there is something beyond data, which is the context, you will realize that in this country, most girls at the age group of 14 don't even get to go to schools. It's only girls who probably go to the school in the right age, in the right grades, sitting in the same class, equivalent to the boys who get the right kind of opportunities, are probably those girls who are getting to be, scoring better than boys. But frankly, in this country, most girls who are at the age group of 14 don't even get to go to schools. At about 8th standard, a lot of government schools basically cut down. They basically don't have classes beyond 8. And then you start finding a lot of massive dropouts. Even girls who are supported by the families, a lot of families do not send their girls to school after 8th standard not because they're not supportive, but they feel that there are a lot more things that they want to be doing. So socially, when you're looking at this lens of education, there is a lot more factors that go into place than just this particular piece. And that's why I just wanted to take this conversation here, because I know a lot of you are going to get into this space right now. EdTech, the way it's boomed in, I'm sure that each of you are going to be looped into this work very soon. You will be working with data from these organizations and whatnot. But frankly, the lens of what's happening on the ground is very important. Girls in this country, like I said, at the age of 14, don't get to schools as much as probably what we imagine them to be. Usually, when you're thinking about this in a policy lens of view, or you're imagining an NGO being coming in, most NGOs or most policies in the space of, say, women, NGOs at least, the way CSR money is spent, goes in two broad areas. There is either the menstrual health or widow rehabilitation. But the fact is, just because we're not looking at data closely, what we don't realize is that there are a lot of girls who can use a bridge programs because they would have also lost their early childhood education time. In a lot of families, girls are sent to schools a little later than the boys because they are supportive, but they feel Ladki, let her grow up a little, then I'll send her to school. Again, 14-year-old girls sitting in grade 3, grade 4, not sitting in the most appropriate classes as such, having lost their early childhood education time. And there is a need for supporting these kind of activities as well. So fact is, this data is collected, and this is where we start understanding what happens to this kind of data. Does somebody collect it? Again, frankly, these kind of data is collected. If you're looking at traditional data records, if I'm not going by the app data that we collect on Byju's and whatnot, if you just go by school records, every school, every college collects a lot of information. There is student information available to us. There is a whole bunch of report cards. There are a whole bunch of trackers generated. We constantly collect data as such as teachers. Alongside, teachers also make a range of observations. Frankly speaking, every data needs to have some kind of context. Just going back to that lens of saying Hadoop can help you understand who prefers what cup of tea, but you still need to understand what that lens of tea is. How do you make that cup of tea as such, right? Similarly, there is a lot of context that teachers have from the ground. They already collect this information. Schools, universities are rich with this information. But what do they do with it? Well, that's the problem here. One of the problems that we know that happens in this particular area is that data is often seen as a punishment. Because data entry in education, especially the traditional education side, continues to remain in a physical format where you're finding things, you're writing things in a notebook, you're putting your registers in, you're being compliant and not really going towards insight. Somebody asked you to fill data, so you're filling it up. You're making report cards because you're supposed to make it. Across the board, people cannot find a purpose in the whole process of collecting data, which is exactly why a lot of insights go amiss, right? If I just show you one quick example of it, this is something that we worked in a government school. Every day there's a register that collects a list of data that says how many boys, how many girls are coming to school by grade, by section. When we collected this data over 3 months, I was fortunate, and Charan again is working in schools as well. When we started using some kind of digital tools, simple tools like Excel, simple tools like Power BI, for us to use this data with the context of saying, what can we do with this? We took 3 months of data and made this very difficult thing called making a chart like this. Just pick up your data, do a right click, come up with a chart. And suddenly we were able to drive an insight that said, every Thursday, the number of girls who came to our school was actually dipping down. Right? Once again, same data. It's the data that we collected, data that is already being generated, not an app-driven data, but data within context of saying what are teachers looking for. Then we suddenly were able to use tools like simple tools like Power BI, simple tools like Excel. And I'm sure that once this is basically one school worth of data, if you're getting into large schools, then you can start using Hadoop and tools and whatnot. But this suddenly gave us an insight that said every Thursday, the number of girls who came to our school is down. And that's when we started understanding what is the reason for some things like this to happen. When you start investigating, once the data points start showing up, then you realize that sometimes your problem, not sometimes, mostly your problems will have solutions locally itself. In our community, we figured out that every Wednesday there was a late night, festival for these girls, probably praying for a, pearly husband eventually in future, and they're all staying up on Thursday mornings fasting. They weren't coming to school. But the beauty of data is the minute this data was presented, you are able to see this. If you're looking at 8,000 students in a school, you're able to make out students are less, but you're never able to point a finger at something. Using such kind of tools suddenly is able to visualize this data for you. You're able to point out what exactly is the challenge over here. For us, 8 teachers were able to take 8 different actions. Each of them had their own set of actions. Each of them basically caught girls with different activities that they wanted to do with them. And in turn, we were able to plug this gap. But that's the beauty of data. If you're able to pull your context, if you're able to use some kind of tools that allow you to do this on a wide scale basis, you are able to address a lot of social issues. And education is a social issue. Education stays in the middle of social issues as such. This is an example that I'm showing you from one government school in Ahmedabad. Imagine this kind of data is being collected across government schools in this country for the last 72 years. And we don't use enough to make these kind of decisions as such. While in education, we are moving towards big data tools like say Hadoop and whatnot, towards understanding creativity versus whatnot, and we have a whole bunch of activities going in there. How often are we able to turn the tide back to say that, am I able to understand my student more holistically? So this is exactly what I showed you. On a very similar note, this data again helps you with visualizations. Charan is also going to be talking about this for a bit, but for us to probably take the same data and start showing this to parents who are probably not educated enough, to take the same data, again, same Power BI, same Hadoop, same Excel, same big data tools that we hear so much about, but we're able to take it back even to parents who are not educated enough and tell them that, listen, on this side, this bar basically shows parents who have the means. This is basically parents who don't have the means. But the same group, when it was clustered to say which parents did not have the means, but were still supportive, that they came to PTMs, they came for homework, they were able to look at just the nourishment of the child, started looking at scores coming close. These uneducated parents who actually think, and this happens, Charan will also be a witness to this, who come and tell us that they cannot support their children because they're not educated. When they're able to see data in a format that allows them to visually look at it. Visual data talks to them without even you giving them a report card. They understand it. For us, they were able to look at that lens of saying what they were actually able to vindicate their own role in the child's life, and they started crying. And that's how data operates. Data is not just about working with that lens of saying I'm going to be driving certain reports at the end of the day and I'm going to just go off. Not really. It starts giving you a lot of real life insights that allow you to make a lot of changes. Such. With that, we basically have been working, and that's where we realize that when we look at data in the education sector, while there are a lot of apps, a lot of companies coming in, one of the big future that you guys can actually start looking at as we move with things is that data. Technically, if you look at this particular little image, your first image is basically all your teachers, your teachers, your educators, your NGOs who are ready to run that long sprint. They're all in to help you guys. I'm sure a lot of your students, each of your teachers is working with you to make sure that you have one of the best futures out there. They run with you to make sure that they're able to give you the support that you need. Then there is a whole splurge of programs, edtech tools, blended learning, so many different things happening, which are supposed to make your rides a lot easier, which are supposed to help you drive a lot more faster. But one of the biggest challenges that's happening is if you don't train these people on using data, if they don't know how to use data, then it ends up adding to the work as such. Somebody who's running easily is suddenly now made to push something more, which is what actually comes back to this idea that of saying that if you have data available doesn't mean that people are making use of it. As you get to the space of using data education, please understand that, and I'm sure a lot of you will be working in, say, edtech companies very soon. Just understand how do you make use of this particular tool? How are people able to make sense out of it? It's going to be a very core area of growth. It's going to be a core area that people are going to look up to you for, right? So people are ready to run the troop. I mean, ready to run the the long distance. You are able to give them a product that's supposed to help them out, but if they don't know the context, then they end up pushing it out, right? For example, and I'm telling you, this is an example that happened to us. This just one more example. This is basically a company. This is basically an organization that does enough to even shape policies out here. And they had actually come up with a new tool as such. They had basically come up with a new edtech tool, and they had done an assessment of nearly about 40,000 students or whatnot. This is great for grade 5 students. We had done a baseline and an end line. I'm sure that most of you will know what a baseline and end line is. Baseline basically means beginning of the year we did a test, end of the year we did a test. Basically, we figured out that grade 5 math paper, math was broken down between few different divisions. There was something called number sense, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, area, fraction. It's given right here. And in the baseline, we're talking about, say, government school students. They were scoring between 0 to 25%. 9 months down in end line, they realized that number sense, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division went up to 25 to 50%. Fraction was around 50 to 75%. Areas was between 75 to 100%. This was the finding at the end line. This was the start happening at the baseline. Can someone, I mean, does this look right? Any thoughts from this room? Do you think this looks like an appropriate number? Do you think something is off? Any thoughts from this room right now? Math papers, grade 5. We're talking about scores. It is possible. Why do you? Okay, Sonakshi, it's interesting that you say possible. Okay, anyone else? And Sonakshi, you can give me a reason also on the chat if that's okay with you. Anyone else? Do you think it's possible to probably get, say, number sense, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, area, fraction? And then you're saying number sense, addition, subtraction, multiplication stays between 50 to 25 to 50%, but area went up to almost about 80%. And fraction was between, say, 75 to 50 to 75%. Arundhati says, I don't think it's possible because you need number sense and operations to do fractions and area problems. Okay, great. Others? Let's take a minute to just get some responses. Not possible, sir. Thank you so much, Habiz. So then how do you think this happened? It was an edtech tool that went out. It was a proper edtech app, edtech product that was out, collecting 40,000, 60,000 worth of data coming from different places. Once again, it becomes big data. You're looking at large sets of data, but that's how the result came out. Prarthana says not possible. Anyone else? So by the way, when this tool rolled out, and by the time we actually went out to look at this problem, we are talking to a room of people which had a large table, obviously sitting down making these assessments. There were a whole set of people who had come from, say, IBM, who had quit the companies, joined edtech companies, started helping them, shape their tech and whatnot. You had IBM, you had big companies, you had some of the IAS officers who've come down, who are sitting on this side, figuring out what the assessment results look like. The other side of the table, we had some government school teachers who were also working with them, setting up these assessments as such. So when we saw this result, again, it baffled us. It said that how can area fraction be so high, considering that the number sense addition subtraction doesn't seem to be that high? Until we realized students could have memorized the questions and formula of area of fractions. Students could have memorized about 40,000, Arundhati, and they all memorized area and fraction only. Interesting.
Like,
go ahead.
No, so like sometimes when you don't understand a concept, you feel like, okay, I'll read the question and then I'll see what the question is doing. And then you don't actually understand what's happening. You just memorize what each step is along the way.
Very interesting, Arundhati. And that's something similar to what had actually happened. So this edtech company and this edtech product that we had was a grade 5, doing a grade 5 math assessment. And technically in math, area questions are nothing but a little square drawn. And then you have a larger image that says count the number of squares. And again, if you're getting into an edtech company, the fraction questions are something simple like a little pie chart drawn. You had one part of it blue and the other part of it gray. And then you had 4 answers that said 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. So technically for the students, they were just able to look at it, make some mental connections of saying this is just counting. The other one, I just have to figure out the colors and give a response to it. Okay. Now the challenge is when it came for 60, 70,000 students as such, I mean 45, 50,000 students as such, the organization was a little stunned of what do they make out of this data, because area of fraction seems to be too high. Nobody saw the questions. People are just looking at the answers of it. People are just looking at what the data was generating. Their answers were sitting right on the other side of the table, because when I asked the same question to those teachers, they were able to quickly come back saying that, yes, that's how it is in grade 5. These are the kind of questions that come through. And that's the role of context. It is important as we start looking at large sets of data, as we start getting it. And education is basically one of those sectors where, so when you speak about retail, when you speak about banking, finance, they all went through stages. You had data being collected at a small scale. You had those accounts book and tally books and khatas and whatnot. Then you had another process that came into the middle where, say, in retail, you went to the retail stores and you said, instead of you giving us your records, I'm going to have a scanner here. So you're going to scan your product. It's going to give me some records over here. In banks, you started having certain limited things like a software and whatnot, which started collecting some bits of information while there was a person in the middle. Your banker was in the middle, your storekeeper was in the middle. Education completely jumped that entire system. Education quickly moved in from collecting examinations to suddenly into this large scale social media data collection kind of a piece where everybody has an app and everybody's trying to pick up information from the app, but nobody has been able to draw the context in the middle. In retail, you had your retailers who were able to give you the context of what that big data looked like. In banks, you were able to get that context from bankers who've seen those softwares earlier. In education, technically, we rarely spend time sitting with teachers to understand what this data is telling us. And that's been one of the biggest challenges that we've seen in this particular sector right now. And frankly, that's what we do. Right now, we are working on just creating these solution context for teachers, wherein if teachers are able to understand what this data is supposed to do for them, the basics of it, that making that one cup of tea, what goes into making that cup of tea, if I'm able to understand it backwards, then for them to work with this data gets better. If you're able to understand your data better, your ride becomes a lot better. If you're able to understand how to work with this data, you can lead that narrative. Even now, as on today, education narratives are still being driven by mostly business owners who are trying to build these tech apps. You still don't have too many teachers on top who are also able to build that context on what this data basically means for you. Again, if you're able to pick up the right kind of data, then you should be able to pick up the right kind of context of support. Not every teacher needs to be good at everything at the same time. Maybe some of them are going to be good in charts. Maybe some of them are going to be good in making question papers. Some of them are going to be good in making plans. Again, as you work with data, just keeping these elements in mind that says, if I'm able to pick this information up from different pieces, then it's going to give me that idea of collaboration. How can I take this to the next level as such? And while we talk about this, this is a landscape that's happening across 95. I mean, we have about 95 lakh teachers in this country. We have 315 million students being assessed. There are about coaching centers that's going to touch up almost $500 million in 2022. The number of schools are only going up. The university professors are still, there are 1.1 million, but we still have a shortage of them. And rather, a lot of these education initiatives are being, these gaps are being covered by your upgrads and a lot of your tech companies that have come up. But the fact is, if you're going to be generating a lot of data, but you're not building that context, the number of teachers who are trained on analyzing data, the number of tools that help teachers to drive support using data is still about none. That's the overall landscape of right now looking at data in education as such. While we have a lot of data being generated from time and for the longest, the number of people who've been trained to even look at that context of interacting with the teacher to understand what this data means is still very limited. And there's a wide scope on it. And that's why this is an opportunity for the group here, that as you look at this lens of seeing education and data, and you're talking about big data and whatnot, there's a wide scale of work that still needs to be done here. How do we connect these schools? How do we connect these education decision makers in using data to make these decisions? That's a space that I'm actively rather, I'd be interested to see how many of you are probably interested in getting into this space and knowing where you can go with this, right? Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Charan, who's working with me, and alongside, he's an active teacher in a school. Charan presently has been using a bunch of tools, simple tools to communicate with his parents and whatnot. Charan has also been a teacher who's been teaching in this space when we've been having this pandemic going on. So there is a lot of so you don't get to meet your parents as often, you don't get to meet your students as often. Data ends up being your one source of communication to make sure that you're able to make these kind of connections happen. So it'll be interesting to hear from Charan in terms of what his experience has been, how he's been using data as such. Over to you, Charan. I can give the screen to you and you can take it from there, or if you're okay to just put the screen up, whatever works for you, we'll take it from there.
Sorry, I was on mute. I didn't realize. I was trying to say that maybe I could just share a screen. To just...
Yes, please. Welcome, Charan.
Oh, I need screen sharing. Right?
Oh, sorry, my bad. You should have it now.
I think as Prasanna was saying, data used as a method to sort of identify the gaps in education is pretty big. So even in TFI, and I'm sure a lot of you might be interested to join Teach for India in the future, you as a fellow, you get to work with data, you get to sort of figure out like, okay, so this kid might need this intervention, this kid might need that intervention. All right. So when my fellowship started, most of our tests were on Google Forms. They weren't paper-based, they weren't I couldn't correct them with a pen or any of those things. It was all Google Forms. So the kids would just enter, choose an option, enter the answer, and they would get their scores. So when I started doing my PTMs, my parents as such didn't even know how to check scores. So we would release scores on email, but they wouldn't know, like email kya hota hai, how do I log in, what is this, where do I get to see my child's progress? And as such, even children didn't really have anything to sort of, see their own progress. It was all on like a Google sheet somewhere. It was like some teachers write on their own register, which I don't have access to because as a kid, I'm not coming to school. So based on all that, I sort of just, thought about it a lot, and I made a kind of sheet that, largely my class and my parents use, right? So what I spoke to a couple of parents. I asked them, like, what would you want to know from your child, right? What would you want to know from their daily activities as a student in an online class? So they're talking about, we don't even know if they attend class. Even if they attend class, what are they doing? We don't know what they're doing. They just sit on their phone. They say class hota hai, homework nahi hai, wo sab ye. I don't know how to check. I know nothing. So just to empower them, I sort of made this sheet. There's a lot of sheets attached to it, which tracks my class attendance, homework, unit tests, and everything. But this is what I thought is important to a parent. So all you need to do as a parent is just open up this sheet, put in your child's roll number. This is Aditya. He's basically my class's topper. So you have all these sort of indicators over here. He's good in class participation. He's got his homework, so he's got no pending homework also. He's attended most of his classes. His handwriting needs improvement a little bit. So I've added as goals to him saying, you need to improve your handwriting. And Aditya as such is a person who's very lazy and he doesn't take part in extracurricular activities. So just added a note saying that, we can take it up as a goal to participate in some extracurricular activities, can take up some Olympiad tests in his, because he's in 6th standard now, the Olympiad tests have just introduced to them. So because he wants to be an engineer or a scientist, I figured that it will be nice for him to sort of, take this up. And every parent has access to this, they can see it. And if I take another example of a similar student, so this is Tanya. Tanya is also in the top, but she can improve on her English because given that I teach in Delhi, their exposure to English is very less. Even at home and everywhere around, Hindi is sort of the language that they're used to talking a lot. So while she's great in academics, her English speaking skills is something that needs improvement. And Tanya as such is very scared of maths. So as you can see, that's the one that she needs to improve the most. She's very scared of maths. So the goals that I had for her is just, improve your rigor of maths and practice speaking English more. So this is like a very simple sheet that I thought my parents would be really happy to use. All they need to do is just log in, go here, enter their kid's roll number, and they get like a progress card of how many classes they have taken place, how many, how many they've missed, how many they've attended late, if they're tardy, how many homeworks are submitted on time, late, and everything that you need. So for me, what I looked at data, especially given my experience of working in startups, was that while it's great to analyze problems, I also need to make data user friendly, especially now, right? Because I can see numbers. I show you this. I can see this. This is my marks for my class. I can see this, but this matters nothing to a parent. This is my calculation. This is me trying to figure out what they're good at speaking, how is their listening, how is their textual this thing. But all this matters nothing to a parent. Like if they see this, it's just numbers. So to make this a little bit more visual was my intention, and just to make parents use that data and say that, okay, this is what my kid is doing in class, right? So you could make it a lot more. So I've added like a little bit of graph over here that says that, hey, this is their yearly performance so far. So you can see that they've dipped somewhere. He's improved in certain subjects, and they're on an improvement this thing, or they're going down in this subject, so they need to concentrate on this subject more. So just stuff like that. And you can make it much better. I've also decided to add some photos of them, but so you can make it really better. You can make it like an actual report card that way, because that's what we were used to when we were growing up. We would get that one report card where it said unit test mein itna aaya, unit test 2 mein itna aaya, half yearly mein itna, midterm mein itna, and now they don't have access to any of those things. So this was just my attempt to sort of bring parents also in as stakeholders in online learning, because online learning is something that especially parents of younger classes have no understanding of. Older classes, they know, okay, 10th standard, I have to write a public exam, so these are the exams I have to take. But in younger classes, because A, you're not technically detained, and B, classes are happening on Zoom, and so there is no real homework, or there is no real accountability as such that happens at home. They have zero clue about what happens in classes. And yeah, so this was my largely, I think for me, it was very important to know what I know about data for my parents. And I just tried to put it in an extremely simple way and just put in numbers, put in graphics wherever possible, to just say that, hey, this is your usability. Just go here, enter a roll number, and you get all you need to know.
Charan, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
So when you were in Dunzo, I think you're using data for a very different aspect, right? You're basically using data with a customer service lens.
Yeah.
Do you think anything of that came in handy here? I mean, anything that, while we are looking at, say, two different aspects, one is going to be sales, the other one is basically teaching. But when it comes to data, do you see something that's common between the two?
Yeah, I think for me, as a like a business analyst or as a team member in the analytics team, the one thing that you would always want to do, or when you have your jobs, is to present data really well, right? Like if you're even presenting a deck for that matter, it has to be pretty. It has to be like, oh, I need to look at this graph and I need to understand everything, right? And that's the sort of mindset to work with when you're working in analytics and data in bigger teams, in corporates or in companies, saying that when I present data to my team, they just need to look at this graph and we need to be able to just figure out, yahan pe problem hua, ye hua, this is the solution we adapted, now we are increasing, this happened, that happened, all from one graph. Correct. And I think that is sort of the mindset I also used in making this sheet. Obviously not at that high level, more of a simplified version, just to give my parents the control over what is happening in their, in their child's class.
And also, I think for us, the children and the parents also become like customers, right? End of the day, the customer service that we give them using data over there is something similar that we would love to do here. And the minute we're able to do that, once we're able to treat them as customers who are able to understand the information at the same platform as where we are coming from, the amount of investment goes up. Yeah,
definitely. And okay, I think the dynamics is slightly different because I work in a government school where teachers are, sort of like, oh, they know everything. But if I work in a private school and I had offered the same sheet, I would also be held equally accountable, saying that, hey, why is my kid not performing well? In a government school, of course, the parents believe that teachers are educated, they know everything. So anything that's related to performance is probably on the kid and not on the teacher. But when parents become more empowered, they start thinking that, hey, I have worked with my kid. He's able to answer when I ask him questions. Why is he not able to answer when it is an exam? What is this? What is happening? Why is this happening? Right. So, and that data makes a transparency happen to every stakeholder. Yeah, exactly. And even children as such, my students enjoy this a lot and they hold me accountable if I don't update it. Like, bhaiya, we can't see my marks. I need to show my marks. And as such, it becomes an enjoyable experience for them also to just show it to their relatives or show it to their friends. This fancy thing of, oh, look, I just put my roll number. I get everything of my class. So I think it also becomes that wow factor exists. Right. In data, especially that, once you get that solution, once you see that result screen, just like how we have that wow factor while working in data, it's very transferable. So,
Super.
that is also there.
Thank you so much, Charan. I have one more question, but before that, I think I'll probably open this up to the audience here. If they have any questions, you can start putting them up in the chat box. Happy to take some of your questions. Somebody can put their hand up. Somebody can, ask your questions to us. Most happy to respond in terms of best of what we can. Any questions that we can answer from this group for this group right now? And while we're waiting for it, I think, Charan, if any thoughts that if you're able to also transfer this knowledge to other teachers who are probably new to data, were you able to see any change in how they were able to work with data in the schools, and if there was a shift in how things were actually happening there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think last year I spoke to my class teacher who was when I was teaching in 5th, and he had maintained all his records on his book basically. And so when I would ask him saying, hey, I need to update an MIS report or something, can you just give me the marks so I can just update it? He would just send me images of his book. And it would be such a challenge for me to sort of update like 200 kids images at one shot. So when I spoke to him saying, hey, can we do this? It's like, mujhe aata nahi hai, and I'm I'm very apprehensive because A, I don't know how to operate Google Sheets, and B, I don't want to make mistakes. So I actually sat with a couple of my teachers in primary. Now, of course, I'm in secondary, but when I was in primary, I sat with a couple of them and just told them that, your work becomes easier. All you need to do is just, set up a sheet like this one time and just put the marks over here and everything just flows through, right? And then when you want to do your MIS report and everything, instead of taking 2 hours, it's probably now reduced down to 20 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. And these teachers are also able to, once they are able to see the context, they're able to deliver better.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they also found the usage of their PTMs and stuff like that improving, because usually, given that it is online right now, they have to go fetch data from somewhere and say, yeah, aapka bachcha ka performance on a Zoom call, which sort of doesn't deliver.
Correct. Very cool. I mean, so between me and Charan, we can just keep doing this through our lives, go on. But I'm going to open us up to questions. So I have obviously we have a great comment from Ms. Soumya. Also, Smith says, why can we not make a software which is simple and easy like this? So this can be in all of India. So the challenge is, Smith, there are multiple challenges here. One is, schools just look very simple from outside. School looks like a very one-dimensional thing from outside. Inside, when you go inside a school is like a circus. You have everything happening at the same time. It's literally a mini microcosm of a society that we live in. Wherein if you ever get inside a school, I would encourage that go spend some time in a school. Everything is happening at the same time. You have your academics, you have your non-academics. Right outside of school, somebody is going to be selling candy. All of it is happening at the same time. Okay, there's going to be distractions across the board, and then you have teaching in the middle of it. The same teacher is going to be working with, say, 30 students, 60 parents, classwork, homework. Then the teacher is also going to be working with leadership, participations, and whatnot. So what happens is, making the software is not the challenge. The challenge is, how do you start? There is always a big gap between the cup and the lip. How do you get these people on board to work with the software? A. B, is your software designed for teachers to work with it? Just that gap itself is something that if we start addressing, and that's what me and Charan are presently doing, that's what we actually are working actively on. And how do we get more teachers understand that they can work with data, so that once we have a set of empowered teachers on board in terms of them being able to understand, then generate that demand from there, saying that what is it that we need to create for them, not create and force fit, but understand what they need and then just go from there. Always happy to have more views from this room. A lot of young minds always come up with a lot of great responses. Ms. Tina says,
excuse me, sir.
Yes,
I had a question.
Please. Yes, please.
So my question was that, so basically showed us the whole visual thing of how a parent should kind of try to understand how their child is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly, sir came up with this idea because of the whole online system, because parents don't know what their child is doing. So
Right.
if this whole online thing wouldn't have started, so would this thing still be implemented, or like how would it have been implemented? And is it just necessary that this happens for in a government school, right? So maybe their parents are not that educated, so seeing it visually is like good for them, they can understand. But like in a private school, would the same thing be implemented? Or
so Pratna, so to answer your question about visuals, I'm going to break this into a couple of different responses. The talk about to converting data into visuals is not just important for schools, but even the biggest of corporates, even the biggest of CEOs make decisions based on visuals, because that's how your minds think. When you have too much of data across different columns, right? Even what Charan showed us on that sheet over there, if we had to sit down on it, our minds get into a fatigue. That's the word that Sonakshi had used in the beginning, fatigue. That's because we always look at data as hard-coded numbers. Visuals help everybody. Visuals, even when you're looking at, say, your cricket dynamics, or somebody saying what's the run rate looking like and what's that graph, the minute we see a graph, you're able to come up with decisions better. So the idea of visuals are going to be as relevant across to the last end of government school through name it, maybe, Sir Ken Robinson himself will be showing you a couple of graphs around what is going to be looking good over there. That's so visuals play an important role across. We are, as humans, we actually process information visually. Second thing is, when you spoke about, say, online education and offline education, it's an excellent point that you bring in. Frankly, the need has been there from the time it was offline. So when I was teaching in a school, I was in an offline school. So after, just like Charan, I was a Teacher India fellow after years of working. When I joined a school, I worked in an offline school. My entire push was that how do we move things online? And they said administrative body will not accept it. Now, fortunately, just before the Corona situation happened, a lot of schools, rather a lot of municipal bodies started saying that let's start having data online. So every state started having these online portals where people had to fill data up. Once again, the challenge was it was still being data fed for the reason of feeding data. Nobody's making sense out of it. It was an extra work for the teachers to basically go and feed the numbers. They'll have enough software issues. Suddenly, some software will say you can't enter data for more than 12 characters. Some student will have his name itself 16 characters. So there has been a massive shift, and there has been a constant idea of moving towards it. But now with the whole Corona situation, with things going online, definitely there's been a lot more push. Now, I think not only are people doing it because they have to do it, but they're also able to see a benefit out of it. These edtech companies are able to make a money out of it, right? I mean, there is suddenly a generation of things that's a benefit for the people who are providing you the service as well. That has expedited that process quite a bit, right? Charan, you wanted to say something?
I also think that, even if it was an offline school model, the fact that this online report card, if you want to call it that, is available at any point of time is definitely helpful for parents, right? So with my school as such, what happens is you only get report cards once your exam is over, and then you have to take a sign and then you have to give it back. So middle of the year when there is no exam, if I want to just track my progress, no way to track my progress. So definitely there is this need of having, like Smith said, a software maybe, but the issue with the software is you still need to train them as to what happens, sort of what are these insights that I'm getting? What happens when I get these insights? What does each of these fields do? So, I mean, as such, you start usually with the basics and then, empower the teachers.
Smith, for an example, if I just talk about it, if you just take LinkedIn as a standalone example of saying what something like a profile can look like, right, over a period of time. LinkedIn gives us a profile of saying that where we do our education, blah blah blah, till wherever we've reached. But look at the dynamics of people who use LinkedIn. It's always people who are probably going to be of a particular economic section in this country. Not everybody understands how to use LinkedIn itself. Not everybody understands how to probably create profiles on LinkedIn itself that's very suiting their particular need, puts the right kind of information over there. So even on a personal note, people are still coming up with things. People are still catching up with things. That's another reason why softwares haven't worked. They are working, people are putting the effort in, but is everybody equipped to use the software rightfully? That's a bigger challenge that is also happening.
Sure, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Pratna.
Prasanna, I have a question on this national education policy, right? I mean,
yes, ma'am.
We have that. And so Prasanna, Charan, I would like you to, to throw some light on how this national, I know it's very progressive. So how is technology enabling and data enabling that to make it happen? And what are you doing as part of augmented understanding? And if you're offering any internships in this space for students who are wanting to explore data in education, not just edtech, but really understanding, even doing some primary surveys or qualitative research around data, how can they participate in this process and making our policy, translate into execution, right?
Absolutely, ma'am. Charan, NEP, do you want to take do you know anything that's happening in the school, or anything? I would love to just hear from you as well, and then I can share my thoughts as well.
I think given the fact that I work in a Delhi government school, NEP is still sort of in progress of bringing it in. They've not yet brought it in, but as teachers, when we looked at it, there was a lot of study being done on why certain policies were taken, especially when you're introducing computers at a very young grade, because I think kids start using computers now according to NEP from 6th grade.
Correct.
Which if you look at it is probably for me the best policy, because as such you cannot do anything. I think right now you cannot do anything without computers. So I think by the time those kids graduate, it's a completely different ball game itself. So to teach digital skills and to teach skills, especially in a digital environment, is very important. And I know that because, we have, I'll give you an example, especially in my school, that we have to make tests out of Google Forms, and none of the teachers know how to use Google Forms to make tests. So that's where the school is in, and they usually depend on, अच्छा ये engineering पढ़ा हुआ है तो इसको पता ही होगा, इसको दे देते हैं, ये बनाएगा paper. So there's always the computer teacher or somebody who has to make it. So, and they, as such, when educators don't itself have that knowledge, like we hope to make India, I mean, as such, the future sort of students or what graduates of India much better technically. And so for me, I guess, that way NEP is great. And I think Prasanna will probably talk about what we do in augmented understanding much better than me.
Sure.
Thanks, Charan. And to answer your question also, Ms. Samya, there has been a push towards data centricity from so NEP is basically one of the results that has happened for the last few years. There has been a push from a lot of different organizations. Rather, what has happened is with the whole CSR opening up in the last few years, a lot of corporate social responsibility started moving towards the whole NGO sector. That's when a lot of corporate leaders have also started identifying what is it that they can do in this particular sector. So people like, say, Mr. Nandan Lenankeni, a whole range of other Infosys, if I'm not wrong, the whole board of them have started working towards somewhere in education now.
Correct.
And frankly, that is where the push started saying that how are we able to create some, broader platforms, bring some digital tools, push that software out. Mr. Ashish Dhawan in Delhi, Bombay has a few set of evangelists. Again, Bangalore again has a set of evangelists. So now the push has slowly moved towards how do we use system thinking around, bringing education to a front. And that's where the whole NEP data, understanding data, using data in classroom started off. But the challenge again remains that most of these people are thinking from a systems point of view. How do we create a platform? How do we create a system that's going to make sure that everything can happen? Systems are always supposed to, make something better. Systems are not supposed to start something from scratch. So the expectation that the system
become enablers, then, that's what it is.
So rather the chart that I showed you right now, which said 95 lakh teachers are available, very frankly, our finding in the last 5-6 years has been this, that with every new tool that comes up and every new policy that comes up from, say, JPAL, and there are hundreds of bodies and Stanford University and Harvard University, everybody coming up with a new research, the challenge on the teachers' burden goes up, because not only they're supposed to teach, they're also supposed to understand these little data frameworks and figure out how they're going to do things. And the worst part is they don't see the result out of it. It's corrected so that somebody can present it in a Stanford University podium hundreds of miles across and get a little grant over there. Right? And that's how the whole policy has been. Very frankly, the people who collect data and give you the information get nothing out of it. So frankly, at Augmented Understanding, our effort, rather we also went through the cycle of saying, should we start with the system? Should we start with a platform? Should we start designing a technology on top of it? Ashutosh as well. That's where our entire conversation started of saying, what do we design over here? So we spent rather the first few years sitting in a school doing something like the monitoring and evaluation for schools. That how do we help teachers understand data from their own classrooms and make sense out of it? Then once we had our frameworks in place, we said, if we have to scale up, then we have to do something different. Let's start training people, and then let's start, picking people up who can help these schools make these decisions.
Sure. So
right now, that's what we do. And in terms of, say, looking at internships and programs, most happy to see what we can actually do over here. Because for a fact that, this is also Christ College group, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
And generally, we've seen that a lot of Christ College folks do end up going to Teach for India fellowships. Rather, a lot of our people that we worked with in the trainings and then post-training support inside schools and helping other teachers out have been from Christ College. I'm in Bangalore, Charan is from Bangalore. So we are doing a whole bunch of activities over there.
Sure. Great.
And would be happy to see what we can do with, say, interested people. If there's something that we can always figure out, they're interested in that education space, how can we figure out, say, a fellowship or volunteering or something of those sorts.
Yeah. I know we are over past time, and I'd like to thank Christ College, the university, for hosting Prasanna and Mr. Charan. Thank you so much. Dr. Samiksha, Dr. Lija, Terrace, would you have anything to share or ask? If there is a feedback form, do circulate that as well so that we can share the feedback with our presenters today. Yeah, I see that. Thank you.
Also, if I can just take a minute to, put a little plug in as well. We are offering the data-driven, teachers with data kind of programs for universities as well. Okay. Happy to come down to Christ College sometime to just show what we do. If teachers are interested, most happy to just take it there.
Sure. Thank you, Prasanna. Terrace, would you like to do the closing remarks?
Yes, so thank you, sir, so much for the insightful talk. I think all of us gathered really valuable information, from really relating the team-making process to data-driven decision-making and the 4 points check to analyze data, the misconceptions around implementing data analytics in classrooms and how we can overcome those to just make social issues better, like to help social issues, and even the challenge of gaining context for class tests as something that we might not really understand as students, but I think now we have a better understanding of how that can help parents as well. Just the data visualization process can help parents as well to just understand how their children are doing in classes. So thank you so much. So I would now like to present the vote of thanks. So I'm honored to present the vote of thanks for this event. But foremost, I would like to thank our guest speakers for today, Mr. Prasanna Sundaraman and Mrs. Charan Murthy. I would also like to thank our WIPD officials, Dr. Ekta Mehul and Ms. Soumya Moni, and also all the student volunteers have brought this event to reality. Last but not least, I would like to thank the individuals that have joined us today. Thank you and have a great day. But before you leave, please do fill the feedback forms. It'll give us a better understanding of how to organize the event better. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arundhati. I was just hoping that we could do a short snap for all the people who would like to sort of, switch on their camera. So yeah, if we can see some of our students on camera, if you can just come on camera, we could do a gallery view and a shot. Yeah.
Also, I'm glad we could do this, Ms. Soumya. I've had missed your emails for quite a bit, and I'm so sorry about that. I'm so glad that we are able to get here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So Anubhuti can do the honors, but I'd like to see a few more faces. I'm not able to see. Everybody's off camera. I think they're a camera shy audience.
I do see a Michael Scott over there, so that just makes me happy.
Good to see. I think that's
done, ma'am. I've taken the screenshot.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining, and it was a pleasure and to host Prasanna and Charan today. Thank you, Christ College, also for hosting this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.